Hey guys, welcome back to another Excel video, and today we are learning 5 different methods to transpose data in Excel. Let's see how it's done. Before we jump into the techniques, let's understand what transpose actually means. When I say I'm transposing the data, I actually mean I'm changing the orientation of the data from horizontal to vertical or vertical to horizontal. Or in other words, columns are shifted to rows and rows are shifted to columns. Like I have this data that is contained within 2 columns and 7 rows. Transposed form of the same data will be contained within 2 rows and 7 columns. With that understood, let's start with the easiest method of all, that uses paste special. Select the data, go to the home tab and press copy. You can also use the shortcut key on the keyboard, that is Ctrl C. Once the data is copied, move to the cell where you want to have the transposed data. For example, I want to have it in cell E2, E3 onwards. I will select cell E2 and then again going back to home tab. Instead of pressing the paste button, I will press the drop down button and from here select paste transpose. Now I haven't clicked the button yet. It is giving me the preview how the data is going to look once it is pasted. So let's go ahead and press the left mouse button, and this completes the paste operation for me. Now this is a very easy and quick method to change the orientation or transpose the data. However, it does have one major limitation, and that is if I change anything in the original set of data, it's not going to update the transposed data for me automatically. And this brings us to other methods that we are going to discuss in this video. Now let's move on to the second method that uses a dedicated function to perform this task that also goes by the same name, that is transpose. However, this function has one significant precondition, and that is we have to pre-select the range of cells where we want to have the transposed data. Once again, we have this data that is contained within 2 columns and 7 rows. In the transposed form, I can guess that it will be contained within 2 rows and 7 columns. So starting with the cell where I want to have the transposed data, I will select 2 rows like this, and I have already selected the first column, second, third, 4, 5, 6 and 7. Now I have pre-selected 2 rows and 7 columns already. Once that is done, press F2 key on the keyboard to enter edit mode and start typing the function. Once the function is inserted, you can see that it has only one argument, and for that, in our case, it is the same data range that we have as an example, close parenthesis, and here is the second catch. Instead of pressing the enter key on the keyboard just like other functions, in this case, or precisely in the case of transpose function, because it is an array function, you have to press a combination of Control Shift Enter. So Control Shift press down and then press enter, and this will insert the transposed form of the original data for me. Now the key benefit of using this function is that if I update the original data, it is going to update the transposed data for me as well. Now this function definitely provides us a dynamically updatable transposed data, but the requirement of pre-selection of the range of cells even before I start typing the function is rather impractical in real life cases, and it severely limits its use and possibilities in Excel workflow. Moving on to the third method, which is basically a creative workaround to the problems we are facing in method 1 and 2 so far. So it starts with referring to the cells in the original data. So let me begin with the equal sign, and with the help of mouse I will go to the first cell in the original data and left click, and this will give the address of the first cell in the data range. Press enter and it will fetch the value from that particular cell. Now dragging the fill handle to the right will fetch the second column's first cell, and I can already see that it is 7 rows deep. Now dragging the fill handle down will populate the rest of the data for me. Now this data is essentially the same data that we have in the original position, and even the orientation is same, however with one major difference, and that is if I go in any of the individual cell, it is basically a formula starting with an equal sign followed by the cell address. Now with that thing known, select the data. Under the home tab, click find and select, and from the menu hit replace. You can invoke the same dialog box using the shortcut keys Ctrl H. Now what I want to do is I want to replace the equal sign with a different prefix. For example, I use hash sign. Click replace all. Now why I have done this, I will explain that in a second. Move this data to a vacant place for a minute, copy, and then paste it in a transposed form where you want to have the transposed data. Once that is done, I simply need to reverse the prefix hash to the equal sign to fetch the data for me. Like this. Replace all, and now you can see that we have the same transposed data here as well. And the key benefit that we were after was to have the transposed data that updates automatically if original data is changed, and that is happening. Now we can make the third method even faster by skipping some of the steps we have already taken and harnessing the power of Axel fill feature. Now for those who are unaware of Axel fill feature, a very quick introduction goes like this. Say I want to type in a series of number. Now instead of writing 4, 5, 6 and so on manually, I can select these numbers and drag the fill handle down, and Axel understands the pattern that I am intending to write a series of numbers, so it will do it for me automatically. Just another example is calendar months. Say I have a January, and if I want to write February, March and so on, I can simply drag the fill handle downwards and Axel will do it for me. This is Axel fill feature that basically helps us in data entry process by automating part, or in some situations majority of the text input for us. Now going back to our example, just like in the beginning of third method, if I want to fetch the value from this cell, I know that I have to provide the address, which is A1 in this case, preceded by an equal sign, and when I press enter, it will fetch a value for me. Now I am intending to have this column presented in a horizontal form in this row. Now it would have been really convenient that had I dragged the fill handle like this and Axel fetched the value from the column downwards, but instead this is what we get. Now let's understand what has actually happened and why it didn't work for us the way we wanted it. The reason is the contents of the cell are not text. We have basically provided Axel with a cell address, and default behavior of fill handle for cells containing addresses is that if I stay within the same row and jump the columns left or right, then it only changes the column number for me. Keep an eye on this area. If I select other cells, you can see the row number has stayed the same, but Axel has changed the column numbers for me. Same goes if I drag the fill handle downwards, as I'm staying within the same column but jumping the rows, Axel will automatically increase or decrease the number of rows depending on the direction I'm moving. As I'm moving downwards, Axel is going to increase the row number for me but keep the column number same. And this is evident by looking at the formula bar once again. Now, in order to work around this default behavior, we have to first convert this input to a text input. And in order to do this, I have to temporarily do away with this equal sign and replace it with some other prefix. And in this case, I'm using hash. And the default behavior for a text input is that it will increase the number by keeping the letter same. And once I have this done, I can go back to Home tab, click Find and Select, then click Replace. And from here, I can replace hash with an equal sign. And there you have the text input converted back to cell addresses. Similarly, I can fetch this column by putting hash B1 and dragging the fill handle to the right, and then replacing hashes with an equal sign. So there you have the original data that was in 2 columns and 7 rows transposed in 2 rows and 7 columns. And once again, I can update the transpose data even if I change the original data. So this is yet another variation of the third method we learned today. Now it's time to move on to method number 4, and in this method we are going to use a combination of some of the very unique or lesser used function in Excel. But before that, let's have a few basic concepts out of our way. Looking at the original data, I want these 2 columns go along these 2 rows like this. Essentially, I want the value of cell A1 in this cell A2 here, and I can continue onwards until I reach the end of the data. Same applies for the second column. I want the value of cell B1 in here, and cell B2 should come in this cell. Now, if we pay attention to what we have here is the letter stays the same and only the number is increasing. This is because the number of rows increases as we move down with the data. Same applies for the second column. Now, there is one possibility that can come to our mind is that if we get the numbers somehow and use Excel fill feature to our advantage, have the numbers and somehow attach A and B with these numbers to get the address and ultimately the values from these 2 columns. Let's see if this is doable. So we start with an equal sign and I have to put a letter in quotes. The reason is if I want to attach a letter or text with the number, the text should go in quotation marks. So n% is the short form of concatenation, and by concatenation means simply combining one text string to another or the value from one cell to the value of another cell. So I have a letter A and I want to attach the value of cell E6 with it, and when I press enter I get A1, and as I drag the fill handle to the right, it keeps the A static and attaches the number for me. Same can be used for B, and I can have the numbers attached to it. So far so good, but the question is, can I use this to get the values from these cells or not? This is where we need a very unique function that helps convert a text input to cell address, and it is known as indirect function. So let's see if this actually works. To confirm, I will provide this cell, close parentheses, press enter, and we have the data in the cell. Now easily if I drag it to the right, it gives me the value of first column. Same way I can fetch the value for the second column like this. But we can have all of this done right inside the function by improving this formula that we are using at the moment. So let's see if that is possible. Once again, use indirect function, and instead of fetching the value of cell address from here, we can make a text string right in this function like this, and again it will give me the same result. And I can use the same methodology for the second column. Now we can improve this formula further by including even this number series right inside our formula. So let's see how this is going to be possible. Once again, starting with the indirect function, have the letter A and %, and now instead of fetching the value from this cell, I'm going to employ column function in Excel. Now the job of column function is just to return the number of column in which we are at the moment. Now manually, if I count, we are in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th column, and I can confirm it by selecting only this part and hitting F9 on the keyboard, and it will give me 5. Or in other words, if I conclude this formula here, it will give me the value of cell A5. Let's see if that is the case. Press enter, and here we are. Cell A5 has DD. Now we want to start from the beginning of the data, which is A1. So what we need to do is we simply need to adjust our column function by deducting 4, that this will result as 5 minus 4, because column is giving us 5, minus 4 will return 1, and indirect will have an argument of A1, thus will return the value of cell A1 to us. Let's see, pressing enter gives us the value of the first cell. And if I drag the fill handle to the right, now as I'm moving to the right, my count of column is increasing. So here, if it was 5, it will be 6 here, it will be 7 here, 8, 9, 10, 11. But I am deducting 4 every time, as you can see in the formula bar. So here it was 1, it was resolving to 1. Here it was resolving to 2, 6 minus 4 gives us 2, and here it was giving us 7 minus 4, 3. So A1, 2, A3, A4, A5, A6, and A7, the whole data range is fetched successfully. Same way, I can use this approach for the second column. I will have a letter B connected to the column function minus 4, because we want to resolve it to 1 instead of fetching the value of 5th row straight. Close parenthesis, press enter, and once again drag the fill handle to the right, and this will get rid of even this series for me, and my formula gets all of this done without any problem at all. So once again, I can update the original data and have it reflected in the transposed data as well. I personally feel this method is much more superior than the first 3 methods we have discussed. The 5th and the last method in today's video is a lot similar to method number 4, with the difference that instead of using an indirect function, we are going to employ index function. So let's start with an equal sign, typing in the index function. Now for index function, 2 arguments are mandatory, but in our case, we have to provide the 3rd argument as well. So first of all, we have an array or reference, which is going to be our data. Once I have the data selected, press F4 once so that it gets logged, and I will not be changing the reference of this range while I will be dragging the fill handle to the right. Once that is done, comma, moving on to the row number argument, I will employ the same methodology that I used in case of indirect function, and that is using the column function. And once again, I will reduce the result by minus 4 so that I can get the first cell instead of getting the 5th cell. And lastly, after a comma, I will provide a column number. Remember, my data is contained within 2 columns and I have to provide from which column should I be getting the values. So for the first column, I will say 1. Once that is done, close parentheses, press enter, and it will fetch the value for me. Now simply dragging it to the right will get the rest of the data. Now for the second column, simply drag the fill handle downwards and adjust the formula to fetch the values from the second column, pressing enter and dragging the fill handle to the right, and this gets our data transposed without any problem. And lastly, this transposed data is dynamically updatable, and if I change the original data, my transposed data is going to change as well. So there you have it, 5 different methods to transpose data in Excel. If you like the tricks, please give this video a thumbs up, and to get the immediate updates on future videos, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon. Until next video, I'm your host Hasaan Fazal, and happy excelling.